Hello, this is Jacqueline from Jack Knits, and I've had several people ask me to show them how I knit continental style with the yarn in my left hand, the working yarn. It is a very quick and efficient way to knit, so it's a great method to learn. So I'm going to show you exactly step by step how I hold my yarn, how I knit, and how I purl. And we're also going to take a look at it in very slow motion so you can see exactly how it's done. Let's do it together. So continental knitting is a very quick and efficient way to knit because there's very little movement in your hand and with your yarn. So it makes for a very fast way to knit. I'm going to show you how I do this, but I'm going to first explain how I hold the yarn in my left hand. Continental knitting is working with the working yarn in your left hand, and it's important to kind of figure out a comfortable way to hold that yarn because it will help with the tension of your knitting. So what I like to do, and this is just my way of holding the yarn, there are several different methods, so you can give my way a try, and if you find that a different method is more comfortable for you, then by all means try that other method. But this is how I hold my yarn. I first start by taking my working yarn and wrapping it around my pinky. Now the reason I do that is to provide tension in the yarn for your knit stitches. If there is no tension there, this working yarn can kind of hang kind of loose in your left hand, and you'll end up knitting very kind of loose and sloppy. But with this wrapped around your pinky, you're providing a little tension with the yarn as it kind of flows through your left hand for your knit stitches. So I wrap it around my pinky just once, and then I bring my yarn down and put my forefinger underneath that working yarn. So it's just like this. And then I'm just going to grab my left needle with my stitches on it. Just kind of grab it all together. So this is kind of how I'm holding my yarn and my needle. Okay? So now you can see that the working yarn is coming over my first finger, and I'm providing that tension by the little wrap that I have around my pinky. All right, so that's how I'm going to hold my left needle. My right needle is in my right hand and just held very comfortably, just like you would pick up any object, just held very loosely and comfortably in my right hand. Okay, so that's how I hold my yarn and needles. Now let's look at the knit stitch. So with the knit stitch, I am going to take my right hand needle and insert it in the stitch like you're going to knit. And when I insert my needle, I'm going to end up with my needle on the right side of my working yarn here. And then I'm going to go underneath my yarn, my working yarn. So I'm wrapping that yarn around my needle, and then I'm going to pull it through my stitch. Okay, and then I like to take my right finger on my right hand and help that by pushing my needle and help that slide off the needle. All right, we're going to look at this several more times. Let's do it again. Insert my needle to the right of my yarn, wrap it around, and then you'll notice that on my left hand, I'm kind of twisting my whole hand and my finger to kind of help wrap that yarn tightly around the needle. That's going to help it when I give it that nice tug around the needle to help successfully get it through the stitch and then slide it off. So there's a little bit of twisting motion with my left hand as that yarn is being wrapped around the needle. Insert it, go underneath, help that with a little twist of your hand, and bring it through the stitch. Okay? Insert it to the right of the yarn, underneath, help it along with your finger and a twist of your hand, and come through the stitch. Now let's do this very slow motion so you can see exactly the movement of the needles and my hand as we do this stitch. Okay, so that is basically the stitch, continental style. As I'm seeing, I'm helping it with my right hand to slide those stitches off, and then at the same time I'm kind of using my thumb on my left needle to kind of scooch the stitches up so I'm ready for the next stitch. So as I'm sliding this off, I'm also scooching those stitches up with my left hand. Push and scooch, so I'm always ready for the next stitch. So it's a very little motion with my hand. It's just an insert, wrap, little twist of my arm or my hand, and off the needle. Okay, and you can see, now this is kind of regular speed here, you can see that it's a very quick and easy way to knit with very little motion in your hand. So you have less fatigue. If you have problems with arthritis or repetitive motion, it helps with that too. Okay, so that's the end of my knit row. Now, let's take a look at how to do purl stitching. All right, let's turn it over and do the next row with purl stitches. And we're going to start again with holding our yarn in the exact same way, wrapping it around our pinky, bringing your finger underneath it, and grabbing onto the needle. So that's the exact way. You're not changing the way you're holding your yarn when you knit or with your purl. Okay, so let's start this row and doing purl stitches. Now you know when you do a purl stitch that your working yarn needs to be in the top of your needle, in front of your needle. So before we start our stitch, we're just going to kind of take our left hand and pop that yarn to the front. So now our working yarn is at the front of the needle. So that's the only difference when you start a purl stitch than when a knit stitch. With a purl stitch, your working yarn is going to be kind of in the front of that needle. Okay, my yarn is in the position correctly. The yarn is in the front. Let's get ready to do our first purl stitch. So with our right needle, we're going to insert it in the top of the stitch over top of our needle as if to purl, just like you would a purl stitch. And now we're going to kind of try to push our needle so it ends up on the left side of our working yarn. Okay, and then we're going to go around the top of our yarn with our needle. And then I'm going to take my first finger here and kind of help again with that wrap around the needle by giving it, kind of bringing my forward finger forward to give it a nice tug around that needle so I can successfully knit through the stitch. And again, push the stitch off my needle. Okay, so that's a little different motion with my left hand to help again that yarn be tugly wrapped around that needle so it can go through that stitch cleanly. So let's do that again. Let's insert our needle into the top of the stitch for a purl stitch. End up with the needle on the left of your working yarn. Bring it over top of that yarn and then give that a help with this finger by bringing this finger forward to kind of tug that yarn around the needle so you can slip that through the stitch and off the needle. Insert it to the left of your yarn, over the top, help it with your finger, and bring it through for the purl stitch. All right, left, around, pull it through and off. Again, now let's do it in very slow motion. All right, so again, it's a very little motion with your hand. Now I'm just kind of not twisting my hand anymore, but I'm just bringing that finger forward to help with that purl stitch. Okay, so again, fast and efficient way to knit. Now, the real beauty of Continental Knitting is when you are switching from a knit stitch to a purl stitch in the same row. A good example of that is, of course, when you're doing a rib stitch where you're like knitting one, purling one, or knit two, purl two. That is when it becomes really fast to do continental stitching or continental knitting. So let me show you that in a minute here, how quickly it is when you switch from a knit to a purl stitch. So continental knitting is very fast, but it is very fast when you are doing a rib stitch or any time where you're switching between knitting and purling stitches frequently in a row. So let's show you how to do that in this row. Let's wrap it again around our hand, get ready to knit. Let's do a knit and purl alternating ribbing stitch. So let's start with a knit stitch, grabbing that yarn, bringing it through, and then we're going to do a purl stitch. And to switch to a purl stitch, I'm just simply bringing this yarn to the front. It was in the back for my knit. Now I'm just kind of bringing it to the front to get ready for a purl stitch. Now when I'm done with that purl stitch, I just let that yarn again fall to the back and do a knit stitch. As I'm taking it off the needle, I can bring that yarn to the front to do my purl stitch. And I'll let it fall to the back for my knit stitch. So see how there's just very little movement when you are now putting your yarn to the front and to the back to knit. To the front to purl, to the back to knit. Front to purl, back to knit. Let's do that in slow motion so you can kind of see that movement of that as well. Okay, well, I hope you give this continental knitting a try. It might take a little bit for you to feel really comfortable with the yarn in your hand and the movement of your fingers and the yarn, but you'll find with a little bit of practice, it is a very efficient way to knit. So give it a try. Hope you enjoy this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up, like. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll receive future videos all about knitting tips and techniques, fun new stitches, and creative patterns. Happy knitting, everyone.